The past 20 or 30 years have seen the machinery of progress extended into even the quietest corners of the Canadian countryside. For nearly 2 centuries, the St. John River Valley in northern New Brunswick has been the home of generations of farm families, engaged for the most part in growing potatoes, the province's major crop. Each year, fewer people produce that crop. Farmers borrow large amounts of capital, buy bigger machines for the job, and begin paying them off by expanding onto more land. Within a competitive economic system, and especially during times of inflation, it's natural that only the best farm managers should survive. What is unnatural is that even those farmers remaining are themselves finding it increasingly difficult to stay on the land.
This has been the theory for the past 20 or 30 years to expand, get larger units, become more efficient. We've done this. We are the most efficient people in the world. We produce more per man hour than anyone else in the world. And that's efficiency, but it hasn't helped us financially. We've produced more for less.
In a country with a seemingly endless capacity to satisfy our needs and whims, little thought is given to the source of our food supply. But the consumer's choices shape the food system, and as city people begin to pay more for food, they will soon realize that they are dependent less on the companies who handle, transform, or wrap than on somebody growing it for them, somebody whose livelihood in the best of years is becoming more and more precarious.
It's crazy. No control whatever. 2 years ago, potatoes went $20 a barrel. No need of it. Half of it would have been plenty. But then there was no need of them going to 50 cents a barrel last year either. There was thousands and thousands of barrels of perfectly good potatoes hauled right out and fed to livestock and starch factory and whatnot, just to get rid of them. So there's no need of this. Something's got to give somewhere.
These people are grading and bagging potatoes for the retail fresh markets of Toronto and Montreal. From the price paid by the consumer are subtracted the costs and profits of the brokers, shippers, wholesalers, retailers, and speculators. The remainder is what the farmer will receive, regardless of his costs. With the demand for processed frozen foods increasing, the fresh market is declining. Nowadays, less than 25% of the New Brunswick crop reaches the consumer as fresh, whole potatoes. Harry Evett grows potatoes for the fresh table market in a way that's becoming less common, by using hand pickers, mostly kids off school for the harvest. Harry knows that the cost of taking off a crop will rise each year. What he can't foresee is what that crop will bring him on the open market.
You fellas, Rose, you pick up on him away.
A farmer hardly knows what kind of weather to hope for anymore. A small overall crop can produce inflated prices, and a good crop can put some farmers out of business. On Jack Brooks' farm, on cold fall mornings, harvesting begins before dawn by tractor light. With his father and brother, Jack grows potatoes for processing in what is now the accepted way, with heavy machinery on a large piece of land. Yet his capital wealth in land and equipment is a burden which makes his living less, not more secure.
10 years ago, it would have been relatively difficult for a potato farmer to go broke 1 year. Now, that's no longer the case. You can be in good shape, that is, you're paying your bills, you're financing yourself, and you can go to the wall in 1 year now. In our harvesting operation, we have machinery that costs probably in the area of $40,000 to $50,000 to do 2 weeks' work. The rest of the year, that machinery is sitting idle. Now we're handling, as I suppose, 50 to 60,000 hundredweights of potatoes. We have mechanized to the point where we can do this. 10 years ago, it would have been unheard of that 3 men could do this. Although we are so mechanized, and although according to all these standards of efficiency, this should make this a good operation, nobody considers the fact that all this mechanization requires service, it requires updating, it requires huge amounts of capital outlay. So the net result is that I'm probably further behind than I was 10 years ago. I've heard the expression so many times about farmers, we're running as fast as we can to stay where we are. Well, I think we're running as fast as we can, but we're not hardly staying where we are.
Unlike Harry Evett's crop, most of Jack's potatoes have been contracted for at a set price to McCain Foods.
The advantages, obviously, are stabilization of price. You know what you're getting pretty well. The grade can fluctuate a little bit, but the price is pretty well stable. Now, the disadvantage of that probably is that the price might not be just what we wanted, and that right now there isn't any means for negotiating on that price.
McCain Foods was started less than 20 years ago, also by a local family, as a company producing French fries. Today, they are a multinational corporation with interests in the food industry from the field to the supermarket. The McCains opened their first kitchen at Florenceville in 1957. Packaged convenience foods were at that time just beginning to gain acceptance. Since then, the McCains have flourished by establishing a market that dwarfs the fresh market.
The products that we do here now are still the potatoes being the #1 item, then peas, beans, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. And then in the prepared foods line, we do cream pies, fruit pies, turnovers, cakes, and more recently we've added pizza. This is a Canadian company, a privately owned Canadian company, and we have a comparatively small group of management people by perhaps corporate standards, and as a result, each individual has a great deal of autonomy, and as a result, one gets a great deal of job satisfaction, particularly when you're with a company that is successful as McCain Foods is.
Good morning, Wallace McCain's office.
McCain Foods' original thrust was in the potato business. And our thrust still internationally is in the potato business. Our business is expanding in Europe very rapidly, and in Australia, and our business is doing well in Canada in the potato business. But in Canada, we think the future is in convenience foods as a whole. That's the reason for us entering the pizza business. I won't try to say that we're better cooks than the housewives. I won't say that statement, thank you. But I think the major point is our time schedule. And so that the prepared foods are expanding very rapidly. And the frozen food part of it, of course, is the fastest growing segment of it.
McCain's process 250,000 pounds of potatoes every hour. They now handle nearly 2/3 of the entire New Brunswick crop. The influence this has given them is felt most immediately by the local farmers, whose largest direct market is now McCain's.
The food processing industry here, and we have one of the largest food processors of potatoes in the world, it takes approximately half of our production, and it has really affected us. It's a good way to get rid of them, to move them. It saves a lot of work. It's an easier way to put them to market than to package them and send them to fresh market. But in the past, since the company started here, their contracts have been barely cost of production, nothing left unless you had a really fantastic crop or were an exceptionally good manager to come out on top. You just barely stayed. And this, the way we see it, is the way the company wants the farmers.
The contract is written for dishonest people. I have to say that probably 98% of our farmers are 100% honest, but there's maybe 2% that aren't. And we found that over the years, that we had to make our contract as tough as it is. Because it is a tough contract. There isn't any question about it. And the contract, I agree, is one-sided. However, I hasten to add, if you ask any farmer in New Brunswick that has dealt with this company any longer than 1 year, if we've used the farmers fairly, and if we've taken advantage of them in any way on that contract, I'll defy them to say so.
The provincial government done a study last year, and their study in cost of production was somewhere roughly in the $5.50 area to produce 165 pounds of potatoes. The McCain contract last year averaged the farmer $5.05 for that same 165 pounds, providing that he could just shovel it up out of his potato house and haul it and put it there.
We run the business, and we'll pay the farmers the very best prices that we can. We know when we contract, we must give them a contract they can make a profit at. And no, if this was a co-op or this was a company which is run by the farmers and ourselves, that's fine, but it isn't. We run it. We own it.
With the help of millions of dollars in federal and provincial grants, the McCains have established several large processing plants and have backed them up with an empire of interlinked companies. These companies form a system of food production, distribution, and farm supply, which now dominates the local economy. The McCains have been responsible for much of the economic development of the area, but in the process, they have gained control over it. The majority of farmers have no alternative market of any size. This leaves them with little choice but to deal with McCain's.
Always in the past, we've been individualists. We've believed that we were king of the manure pile. We were independent. We could do as we wished, but actually we've been manipulated, and we haven't been masters of our own destiny in any way whatsoever.
It's the feeling of having no say in their own affairs, no control over their costs or their receipts, and of being ignored both by the public and by their governments, which has begun to pull farmers together into organized groups to discuss and even dramatize their plight by such activities as this potato giveaway, organized by the National Farmers Union, one of two groups in the area competing for membership.
We have had 5,000 10-pound Canada #1 bags to give away. They are not spoiled potatoes. They are perfectly good round white potatoes. And we have given away 3,000 as far as Alberta cars have been going through here. It's been just a great response.
Producer organizations have been tried here before, with little success. Farmers have always put a high value on their independence and have resisted most forms of organized cooperation. But with the situation becoming more critical, farmers are beginning to recognize their need for collective strength.
To reverse the trend. What can you suggest?
It's really frustrating for a young person like me because I'm not used to this. You know, I see people in other areas that are unionized, they really get uptight. You know, they really get violent over things that aren't nearly as critical as what's happening in the area.
The illness in the potato industry in New Brunswick is very much like a child with the cold. A symptom of the cold is a runny nose. A symptom of our illness in the potato industry is the way we're being used by McCain's. Now, you can wipe the kid's runny nose, but he still has the cold. And you can wipe McCain's out, but the opportunity is still there for somebody else like them to take their place. What I'm really saying is that the way to control our destiny is to make those people we elect realize that we do elect them and that they are responsible to us and not to some sector of economic clout who happens to have more to gain than we do as individuals.
On April 17th, 1975, 250 farmers from the Upper St. John Valley met with Premier Hatfield on the steps of the provincial legislature in Fredericton. Their proposal was to hold a plebiscite to decide which of two organizations represented the majority of farmers, and from there to begin the push for collective bargaining. Their request was denied.
Just as Hatfield said when we met him the last time, and it's very significant, he said, and I quote, "I will decide what is best for the farmers."
The governments have got to realize that they have got to either support the family farm or else come out and say, we're against the family farm, we're supporting the corporations.
The Premier already has practically told us that. Didn't exactly say that he was against the family farm, but he said it was finished. He said all farming in the future will be done by corporations. Not that I like it, but it's inevitable. Those are his exact words.
Our aim is not to produce our own produce. Our aim is to buy it from the local farmers. That's company policy, has been, is, and will be in the future.
60 to 30. What's the field condition situation right now?
It's getting sticky, but I think we'll be able to keep on till dinner time.
Though corporate farming may be the trend, Wallace McCain knows that family farms can produce potatoes more efficiently than his company can. Yet the McCains now farm thousands of acres of prime farmland. To McCain, these operations represent security. To the farmer, they provide the corporation with another instrument for market control.
If you have an operation like this, you can grow, say, 5,000 acres of potatoes. You can lose $100 per acre and plan that loss and recoup 10 times that much by having that in there to control the market with. Now, regardless of whether they get an optimum yield of 180 barrels per acre or whether they get a minimal yield of 75 barrels per acre, that's insignificant. The significant thing is this. Number one, they will say, we've got the potatoes of our own if you don't do what you want to do or we want you to do. Number two, why can't you grow potatoes cheaper? We do. And how are we going to argue?
How many acres do you grow?
That's our business.
Estimates run from 5,000 to 8,000 acres. As a private corporation, McCain's are not required to make such information public. But like all McCain business, it has affected the farmers. Antoine Desjardins used to own 300 acres of prime farmland until debts to McCain and the bank forced him to sell out. When his farm was sold at public auction, his own lawyer bought it and subsequently resold it to McCain.
Là, je me suis dit, j'étais 2 ans sans travailler, je jardinais, puis j'ai dit, wow, j'ai des enfants.
I didn't work for about 2 years. I did some gardening, but then I realized I had to pull myself together. I have young children. That's all that matters. So 2 years ago, I started to work. I worked for McCain.
Après tout ça,
Il n'y a rien d'autre à faire?
faut laisser notre orgueil, oui.
You have to let go. You have to swallow your pride. But my children will never work for them. They'll just have to move away.
Le regret, je l'ai dans mon cœur. Parce que s'il y aurait plus de justice,
It hurts
tout le monde
because if there was any justice, people will live as they should. Perhaps. But nobody gives a damn.
c'est ça qui manque aujourd'hui, la charité.
Money is the only thing that counts.
C'est ça qui
Everybody has his price.
Aujourd'hui, quoi ce qui marche, c'est l'argent. C'est acheté par un lot, n'importe qui. Je pense qu'il y a un qui le pape qui ne s'arrête pas.
When you get large tracts of land taken up, they take the buildings off, they take off all the tax value that's taken off of it. So then what this does is depopulate the rural area of the country. And when you do this, well, then you have just open spaces where the house here, and the same as it's got to be now in the prairies where you go for 20 miles before you find another one. And when you do this, well, then you have lost your rural community.
The average farmer in this country is in his mid-50s. When he started farming, he was surrounded by neighbors, but by now he might own land for miles around. He's thinking of retiring someday soon, and he's wondering who will take his place.
Oh, no, I've made a good living here. I can't complain. I've lived here. I didn't have a lot of things that other people had, but we never went hungry or went cold, so I guess we've had a fair life here, but I think now I can take it a little easier. Hope I can, anyway.
Did you get all picked up?
Huh?
You all picked up? I've been at it 30 years since the war, and I'm wearing out. And it needs someone to take over my unit, which is a viable unit. And it's large enough. We don't need them any larger. I know, I can sell it today to the corporation. I could have sold it last year for a lot of money. Financially, I'd have been smart to have taken it. But I didn't want to see the family unit go by the board.
How do you feel at the end of the day?
I'm tired. An awful sore.
What's that?
It's a ticket. See, we each gotta have a ticket, and that way the fellers that get the barrels know who we are, and they would give the money to.
Well, under present conditions, there's no way any young man or woman who's interested in producing food, wants to farm, there's no way they can get into it at the present time unless their father is a farmer and he wants to pass it down to his son. That's the only way that a young man can get in.
In harvest, how can I honestly tell my son, who is now 5 years old, how can I honestly tell him, son, I'd like you to take over in my steps. I have a share in an operation which might be worth $250,000. It's going to cost you $100,000 every year to put your crop in and not knowing what you're going to get out of it. How am I going to be honest with myself and be a good father and encourage my son to take on something like that?
At the basis of all societies is the man in the country, producing a surplus of food beyond the needs of his family. The farmer in New Brunswick, still independent in spirit, sees himself caught up in an economic situation which is endangering his whole way of life. If family farms continue to be neglected by governments and by city people, the price will be paid not only by the farmer, but by all of society. The future is being decided now by choices being made in the cities and by changes taking place in the countryside.